You here tonight. Thanks for coming. Lord bless you. It's great to have everybody out. We have water baptisms tonight. Are you guys here for water baptisms? Or to see somebody? Oh, well, you're welcome to come over here. There's not that many of us. Join us in and welcome. It's so great to see you. You know, this is the second to last night of the book of Revelation. Anybody else sad? They're not that sad, evidently. Ready for whatever. But we are in Revelation chapter 21, and if you haven't been here for the whole series, just so you know, we are at the place right now where the book of Revelation is beginning to envision the future. And so you say, I thought that's what all of the book of Revelation does. And some people think that, but there's a lot of the book of Revelation which has to do namely with what happened in the first century when Jerusalem was destroyed and the early church was launched. And Brother Brian, I don't know if you know how to play with that to make sure that I can control this. If you can't figure it out, just let me know. And so, what is an apocalypse? I have a new clause to my definition. Do you know how to do it? Hey. Yes, okay, thank you, Brian. So, an apocalypse is a prophetic work of symbolic art. So all these words are chosen. It's prophetic, just in case anybody says, oh, so you're just saying it's a work of art? No, it's not, but it is also a masterful work of art. If you doubt it for any reason, just the chapter we're going to read tonight is maybe one of the most brilliant chapters in all of the Bible. I mean, that's how brilliant the artistry of the language is. And it goes back to all of the apocalypses that came before it. And so it's a prophetic work of symbolic art. It's very symbolic. There are some of the parts of the description tonight that if you can't take some things symbolically, there's no other way to take them. So some people tend to be more literalists. Some people tend to be more symbolic or allegorical. I'm neither one. I don't care if it's literal. I don't care if it's symbolic. What I want to do is go back and figure out what it originally was. So I came up with a new title for myself, even though I'm not that into isms. But I'm an originalist. That's my end times theory. I'm an originalist. I think you got to go back and figure out who was this written to, and we know 7 churches up in Asia Minor, which is modern-day Western Turkey. And it was written to them in the first century, somewhere around 95 AD, give or take. And so you have to go back into their generation and think, what would this have meant to them? And so the clause that I added, commemorating the end of an age. So it's another thing that an apocalypse does, is it's written at the end of an age. Like, what is an age? So in Hebrew theology, in ours, we think of time as like a timeline. Theirs went in cycles. And they had very obvious ones because every couple hundred years, another empire would conquer them. And so Israel, since its inception, has been conquered by 37 different kingdoms. Can you imagine that? Where else on the planet has been conquered 37 times? I can't think of one. But so their time kind of goes like this, and each one of those was an age that they lived through, and eventually it came to an end, and they wrote an apocalypse about it. So an apocalypse is it's poetic, it's prophetic, it's very symbolic, but it's kind of an expression of all of their collective trauma, all of the pain they just went through, and what's gone and what's new. You know, who did we used to be, and now who are we going to be? And so the book of Revelation, or the apocalypse of John, is kind of man, you have to be my age to remember the malls. But remember when you go to the directory at the mall? How do you know where you are? You look for this little button that says, you are here, right? Book of Revelation is that little identifier, you are here. Where are we? Well, Jerusalem just got destroyed by the Romans, and now the church is scattered in Asia Minor and North Africa and Mesopotamia. The church is scattered, but the church isn't over. And now Jesus is on his throne, and the center of our religion is no longer Jerusalem and the temple, because the temple's no more. There's no more high priests. There's no more sacrifices. There's no more temple. Jerusalem still survives. After the Romans burnt it to the ground, basically, including the temple, they moved a whole legion in there and used it as their headquarters. And eventually it got built back up as a Roman city. And then eventually when the Roman Empire became Christianized, it became a center. And so, the purpose of an apocalypse is to give spiritual meaning and encouragement to a traumatized generation. And so here's the basic apocalypses. There are probably more than this, but I think the easiest way is to think about it in these 5. There was the Assyrian apocalypse, which was the Assyrians under Sennacherib came in and destroyed the northern kingdom, which was the northern 10 tribes. And so now all 12 tribes sought refuge in the city of Jerusalem. So it used to be a northern kingdom with 10 tribes, a southern kingdom with 2, and no, that's not exactly accurate, but just I'm generalizing. And eventually all 12 were living down in Jerusalem. That's going to come up a lot tonight. And so that's the first apocalypse, is when Israel was destroyed, the northern kingdom. The second one was when in 586 the Babylonians came and destroyed Jerusalem. So first the northern kingdom got destroyed, and then the southern one, and exiled everybody into Babylon. So prophets like Joel and Jeremiah and Ezekiel wrote from that. John's going to quote a lot from Ezekiel tonight. He's also going to quote especially from Isaiah, and most specifically the second part of Isaiah. And so, and then the Persians came and conquered the Babylonians in 539 and allowed the Israelites to go back to rebuild their temple. And prophets like Ezra and Nehemiah wrote during that time, and a prophet named Zechariah. I think there's a quote from him tonight. And then lastly, the Greeks under a guy named Antiochus came in and tried to stomp out Judaism somewhere around 165 BC, and they won a victory over it. And the book of Daniel was written in response to that. We read a prayer from the book of Daniel on Sunday. And then the last one was the Romans, who came in 63 BC and took over everything, and then eventually got tired of the Jews rebelling. And so in 70 AD, they came in and destroyed the temple for the last time and destroyed Jerusalem. And about 25 years later, a man named John, might have been the Apostle John, or it might have been another one, because there were a lot of them. It's a very, very common name. Sat down and wrote an apocalypse about it, inspired by the Holy Spirit. It's the last book written in the Bible, at least in the Christian Bible. Scripture wouldn't be added to until 500 years later, when Muhammad began the Muslim religion and added a third wing to it. But it's the last book, and it's kind of like an encapsulation of the whole thing. And even early on, some of the early church fathers that tried to tackle this book didn't know what it was talking about. It got lost. It's so symbolic and so mysterious. If you've ever read the book of Revelation and been confused, if you ever read it and been confused, it's because you're reading it right. It was not meant to explain anything simply. It was written as a puzzle. And so I think if John had ever written something that was so easy to figure out, he would have scratched it out and thought of a more complicated way to say it. That was the art form. Why would anybody write in puzzles? Because the deeper you dig at a puzzle, the more rewarding it is when you figure it out. And so the problem is, if you hide the Easter eggs too well, a couple generations later, they don't even know what you're talking about. And I've read many of the early church fathers, and most of them say something along the lines of, "We have no idea," and that was written just a couple generations ago. But so anyway, so how would we be so smart in 2026? Well, we have a couple advantages that most of those church fathers didn't have. And I have no special revelation. I hope I've said that enough times. I have no insider information. All of my historical facts and figures you can look up on the internet. Most of them you can find on Wikipedia. I mean, literally, say, is that right about Constantine? Just go on Wikipedia and say, yeah, I guess he was right. And by the way, every once in a while I make a mistake, so please tell me, because I'm not here to give any new information. But there are a couple of books that are extremely helpful, and for me, If you don't have both these books, you can't understand the book of Revelation. And neither one of them are in the Bible. One of them is a book called Josephus. He was a general, a Jewish general during the war, and when the Romans caught him, he defected and became the translator for the head generals who eventually became the Caesars. And he wrote several books, Antiquities of the Jews, and he wrote one on the War of the Jews. So we have some of the most detailed descriptions that aren't in the Bible, but of how that war went. I'm so grateful for him because I wouldn't have known anything about that outside of Josephus. There are other people that mention the war, but we know more about the battles that happened in the war with the Jews than we do about a lot of the battles that happened in World War II or even Vietnam. So detailed and precise. The second book that I think that without it, you can't understand the book of Revelation is the book of First Enoch. And I kind of ended with that last week, and I could tell some people were still scratching their heads. Some people were asking questions last week. Kevin, didn't you have an unanswered question last week? Do you remember it? You want to think about it for a second? Okay. Go ahead, Kev. Wait for the microphone. Go ahead.
Well, you said that was like over 200 years of being written, and so it's like, how could one author do that over 200 years or so?
Great question.
And so,
because one author didn't do it. So Enoch is the name of a book. Well, that's what we call it. And it's 110, I forget how many chapters are in Enoch, over 100 chapters. And it's really obvious to most scholars that it wasn't all written by the same person or during the same era. And so between the oldest sections, we call it the Book of the Watchers, the part with the fallen angels and all of that, which, by the way, if you ever saw the Russell Crowe movie about Noah and wondered where all of those weird creatures came from, it's from Enoch. They say, that's not in the Bible. No, it's not. But they were just, I guess they'd read Enoch. But there are parts of it, Kevin, that are later. And so, and in several of the places, it starts off in the beginning of the chapter and said, I, Enoch, these are the writings of Enoch, right? Problem is, who was Enoch? In the Bible, Enoch was the 7th generation down from Adam. He was the father of Methuselah and the grandfather of Noah. Okay, so why couldn't Noah's grandfather have written the book of Enoch? Because the Hebrew language didn't exist that far back. And so this is very, very, very old. We don't have literature that's that old. And so the church fathers, 200 BC, 100 BC, that were trying to figure out which books belonged in the Bible, one of the reasons is because it claims to be written by Enoch, and it's obvious to everybody that it wasn't. And so it's written in the name of Enoch. Does that make sense? It's not the only book like that. We have books that claim to be written by Barnabas, written by Solomon, that claim to be written by all sorts of different patriarchs. It's just kind of something they did back in those days and that aren't in the Bible. And so, Book of Enoch, it's a collection of apocalypses, so it's a bunch of them, like a collection of poetry, right? It's a collection of apocalypses written by numerous writers between 300 and 100 BC, or thereabouts. It's written in the voice of Enoch, 7th from Adam, grandfather to Noah, and it's the only complete copy of it, and here's what's really interesting of it, is in the ancient Ethiopian dialect of Ge'ez. So in Ethiopia, they have about 4 or 5 dialects from their ancient kingdoms that are closely related, but Ge'ez is the old liturgical language. People don't speak it per se. It's like being able to read biblical Hebrew. It's a Semitic language. It's from Semitic is like the root of Hebrew and Aramaic and Arabic and Ethiopic. They all come from the same root. And we didn't know about it. We being none of the church fathers knew about it until 1773 when a man named James Bruce brought it back, 3 copies to Europe in Ethiopic. And in 1821, Richard Lawrence translates it into English, so follow me on this. So until 1821, nobody that read English could read the book of Enoch, didn't know it existed. And I don't know if you remember, if you were here last week, almost everything in chapter 20 is a quote from Enoch. But nobody before 1821 knew that. You with me? So what I'm sharing with you, it's not because everybody else was just wrong, but Martin Luther, John Calvin, George Whitefield, any of those Bible scholars or preachers before 1821 had no idea about Enoch. And we do. And not only that, but we have computers so that we can look stuff up fast. And I can type in there, Book of Life, and it shows me right where it is, right? Then August Dillman, oh man, I did some Ethiopic studies a while back. That's a big name. He's like the Noah Webster of Ethiopic. He produced the first critical edition, which means you take all of the manuscripts you have and try to triangulate on what the accurate original was. And then something happened in 1948, because up until then, we had it in Ethiopic, and we don't know. Was that the original version? Was it written in the 3rd or 4th century AD? We don't know. Until 1948, we found some scraps of it. Not a whole copy, but some remnants of it in the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran in Israel. And they're written in the Old Herodian script, which is from somewhere around 3 to 200 BC, about the time that we think Enoch was written. And so that's kind of one of the things that gives us a date. And then in 76, an English translation of the fragments were finally published. And one of the things we found, this is, and I don't know how well you can see that, but that is Aramaic. That's one of the scraps of Enoch from the Book of the Watchers. That's one of the biggest fragments that we have. And it looks exactly like Hebrew because it is. It's the same exact letters as Hebrew, but it's a different language. It's Aramaic. So it's like going from French to Italian, right? They're similar, but they're different, and they're written with the same letters, right? And so this is why we think it's about 300 years old. And here's what it looks like in Ge'ez. Ge'ez is really cool. It's a syllabic language, and you read it from right to left. And they would do a lot of this interspersing red ink. At one point in their history, they began to write the name of the Lord in red ink, Exeabeher, which means stands in front of the tribe. That's the name for God. It's one of the longest words. And I said there were 3 copies brought back by James Bruce. One of them lives in the Bodleian Library in Oxford, and back in 2018, I got to go see it. And so there's me holding a very, very ancient text, along with some magic scrolls and some psalters, and I actually got to hold that in my hands, one of the oldest copies of the Book of Enoch. And so it's pretty cool. I have a friend who was a professor at George Fox who took me along, had to teach me to read it so that I could help him with his psalters, so that I could go on a study tour in Oxford. And one of his friends was the curator at the Bodleian. And she brought all of the texts out, and we got to sit there and look at them. Pretty cool. Has nothing to do with my message tonight. But here's how Enoch begins. Oh, can you read it? If you can read it from the top line right there. There's his name. In Ethiopic, it's Henoch. It starts with an H. But this says, the words and the blessings of Enoch, wherewith he blessed the elect and the righteous, who will be living in the day of tribulation, when all of the wicked and the godless will be removed. And so this is from way back. This is before Jesus' time. And between the Old and New Testament, there was a lot of end times fervor and a lot of apocalyptic literature and teaching, because they really thought that it was about time that the wicked people be gotten rid of. Doesn't that sound right? How many are holding out for a little bit that Hitler's going to get his someday? And so the notion of the righteous being rewarded and the wicked people being taken out, it began between the 2 testaments and was a big part of the book of Revelation. So let's get into it. Questions so far about that? That is not the right time. Yes, it is. Questions so far? So I'm going to hoof it. I may not make it through all this tonight because we're going to be done at 7:30. You believe me? It's true, because we got baptisms at 7:30, so I got to be done. He says, and I saw a new heaven and a new earth, For the first heaven and the first earth have passed away, and the sea is no more. So one of the things you have to do with these passages is if you just take that and you just sit down at a Bible study and you say, what does that mean? God's going to destroy the old heaven and the old earth and start over again? One of the most important things you have to do with understanding Revelation is understand what it's quoting. And this is not an original phrase to John. It comes from the book of Isaiah. This is the third part, so we call it Trito-Isaiah, right at the end. He says, "But for behold, I create a new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered, nor come to mind." And so what this is, it's a retelling. So this part of Isaiah is after the exile. It's purple, so it's during the Persian period. After the exile, I'm going to guess somewhere around maybe 520 BC. And it's after the exile, and they're restoring Jerusalem. They're getting ready to rebuild Jerusalem, rebuild the temple, and start all over again. And so at the beginning of the Bible, it says, in the beginning, God did what? He created the new heavens and the new earth. Now Jerusalem is destroyed. They went into exile. The exile is over, and he says, behold, I'm going to do it all over again. Here comes a new heaven and a new earth. And so this is a symbolic retelling that the old age is gone and the new age is coming. Are you with me? So there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. And then he says, and I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready like a bride to be adorned for her husband. And so there's a little bit of an Easter egg here. In Apocalypse, you can use more than one metaphor for the same thing. Like a few chapters ago, it talked about a great prostitute that had committed adultery with the nations. And who is that prostitute? If you were here, it's Jerusalem. All right. That's why Jerusalem got destroyed, is because it had sold out to all of the pagan worship and the worship of the emperor. So Jerusalem is a great prostitute. And then it says, fallen is Babylon the Great. What's Babylon the Great? Also Jerusalem. And so it's not the city of Babylon, which was in Mesopotamia, but the story of Babylon back in the day, which is where they got delivered from, now is Jerusalem. And so just as they escaped from Babylon, now the early church escaped from Jerusalem. So Jerusalem was their Babylon. So how can Jerusalem be both a prostitute and Babylon? It just is. That's how apocalypses work. It can be more than one thing. Are you with me? So the harlot of Babylon is not two different things. The harlot of Babylon is a mashup with a mixed metaphor. And so now, because Jerusalem is destroyed, and so this is why I have a problem with people say that Babylon is Rome, because the whole book is about Jerusalem. When did Rome fall in the first century? It didn't. And so why do we need a new Jerusalem? Because the old one is destroyed. You with me? This isn't about something in the distant future. The new Jerusalem came because the old Jerusalem got destroyed. But the new Jerusalem isn't an earthly city, as you'll see in just a moment. Too many symbolically weird things. All of this is happening in a dream. Jerusalem isn't an earthly city. I know there's a city called Jerusalem now. But the new Jerusalem isn't an earthly city. The new Jerusalem is a spiritual city. The new Jerusalem is the church. The new Jerusalem is what replaced the old Jerusalem. So when Jerusalem got destroyed and the churches scattered in Asia Minor and Africa and Mesopotamia, now it's become the new Jerusalem. And so now he's going to describe in very symbolic, spiritual terms what it's like to be a part of this new city. It's very idealistic, very much preaching. This is each one of these symbols is going to be another aspect of what the church is supposed to be like in the world. Are you with me so far? And so here's the double meaning. So you remember there were two women. One of them, he looks, and it was a prostitute riding a beast. The beast was Rome. And then he looked, and also there was a woman. There was the bride. So these two things are the opposites. The prostitute is unfaithful Israel that sold out to Rome. And the bride is faithful Israel, who's now the church. Are you with me? And so that's how Just like the Babylon was the prostitute, New Jerusalem is the bride. And she's adorned herself. Some people say, isn't the New Jerusalem heaven? He says, no, because it comes down out of heaven. So it's going to talk about, in the next chapter, he's going to talk about heaven as well, and he already has. But the New Jerusalem comes out of heaven. So our gifts and the Holy Spirit come out of heaven and empower the church to be what it's supposed to be. Yeah? All right. I'm going to not rush. Is that okay? Yeah. If I don't just fire hydrant, because there's a lot of, I'm just going to go as far as I get, and then we'll stop, and then I'll finish up next week. Isaiah 65 says, this once again is in Trito-Isaiah, so this is after the exile, about the new formation of Israel. But be you glad and rejoice forever in that which I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem a rejoicing, and her people a joy. And so Isaiah is talking about actually rebuilding Jerusalem. And John is using that same language to talk about the church being the New Jerusalem. Yeah? Next one is, for Hebrews 11 talks about Abraham. He was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. All right. And he says, and then I heard a voice out of heaven saying, behold, God's dwelling is with people, and he will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. And several of the prophets talk about this. When I finally restore the fortunes of Jerusalem, that's in the Old Testament, they'll be my people, and I'll be their God. I just love that. Zechariah, for example, is a prophet after the exile. And I will bring them, and they will dwell in the midst of Jerusalem, and they will be my people, and I will be their God, in truth and in righteousness. And so Zechariah is prophesying about the idealistic, what the New Jerusalem's supposed to be like, just like John is prophesying to the church. Yeah? Oh, I like this line. It's one of my favorites. And he will wipe away from them every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more, neither will there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore. The first things have passed away. When is this going to happen? I always read this at funerals, right? Because don't you think about this as happening? This is talking about someday in heaven. There's going to be no more crying, no more sorrow. Aren't you looking forward to that? But did you know this didn't come from the New Testament? It comes from way back in the Old Testament. So the first time those words were used, it was by, guess who? And this is way back in the time of Hezekiah. The first layer, the Assyrian layer. When after the Assyrians came through and Jerusalem was saved, and he says that he has swallowed up death forever. And the Lord Yahweh will wipe tears from off their faces. And the reproach of his people he will take away from off all the land. For Yahweh has spoken. And so I am looking forward to the day when we're together with the Lord in heaven, there's going to be no more death. So that can't be about the church. There's obviously death in the church. But he's speaking in very prophetic terms. I was just reading Augustine in City of God. He gets to this point and he says, well, this part can't be about the church because there's still death and sorrow and stuff like that. But friends, what he's talking about is very poetic and prophetic terms. It's not just he's going to take away death, but he's going to take away the oppressor. He's going to come in and it's not that we won't be able to be sorry, we just won't have a reason to be sorry. Are you with me? And so this is something that's going to be restored in those days. The ultimate expression of this obviously is heaven, but there's something about this that even this side of heaven, that God has swallowed up the power of death in our lives because we don't have to fear it anymore. Are you with me? All right, I'll just keep going. Also in 1 Isaiah, it says, and Yahweh's ransomed ones will return and come with singing to Zion, and everlasting joy will be on their heads. Anybody remember the song? And they will obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing will flee away. Do you think we'll have emotions in heaven? Okay, if you have emotions, can't you get sad? Say, wait, we're going to have emotions, but only happy emotions. I think what it's talking about is not removing, like, I can do that to you now. It's called a lobotomy. You can take away all your emotions. But someday in heaven, we're going to be removed from the very reason for our sorrow. All of our pain, all our sickness, all of that's going to be taken away. Are you with me? All right. And then he says, and he who sits on his throne says, behold, I'm making all things new. And he said, write, for the words of God are faithful and true. In this part, John's quoting from, it's not in the Bible, it's from one of those books. There's 3 different books he quotes from in this. Another one written about the time of Enoch that didn't make it into the Bible. It's called The Wisdom of Solomon. And no, it wasn't written by Solomon. That's just what it's called. And there's this little line, and being but one, he writes a lot of poetry in Wisdom of Solomon as about wisdom, capital W. And she's a she. She has kind of a personification of wisdom. But she can do all things, and remaining in herself, she makes all things new. And in all ages, entering into holy souls, she makes them friends of God and prophets. And so it's not because of that verse it didn't make it in. There's other stuff in there that the church fathers thought, no, that doesn't belong. Then he says in verse 6, he said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. You all know Alpha and Omega, right? It's the first and last letter of the Greek alphabet. So it's just another poetic way of saying I'm the first and the last, which is a line that comes from Isaiah. Who has worked and done it, calling the generations from the beginning. I, Yahweh, the first and the last. I am He. This is in the second part of Isaiah, where he's prophesying about coming back from Babylon and reconstituting the nation again. And he says, and I will give freely to him who is thirsty from the spring of the water of life. This is a quote from Isaiah 55. Everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. Buy water that you didn't pay for, food that you didn't pay for. This is that invitation to come back and be reformed. The second section of Isaiah is one of my favorite places. I call it the Gospel of Isaiah. It literally is where I get the phrase, I've got good news for you today. Because it's when they were returning from exile, and we're going to get there on Sunday morning, returning from exile, that all of these beautiful scriptures were written, that they were going to be restored, and that everything was going to be made new again. He says in verse 7, and he who overcomes, will I give him these things. I will be his God, and he will be my son. I didn't quote it, but there's Psalm 2 talks about, today, you are my son, today I have become your father. It's a line from the time of Hezekiah. He says, but the cowardly, the unbelieving, well, that's not you, right? That's those guys. Let's listen to what they say. The cowardly, the unbelieving, the sinners, the abominable, the murderers, the sexually immoral, the sorcerers, the idolaters, and all liars. Their part is in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. So this is just a very apocalyptic thing to say. In this New Jerusalem, do we want those guys? No. And that's not you. That's not you, because you're a child of God, right? So he's just saying when we start all over again, we're going to start all over again. We used to have a lot of that stuff, but we're going to leave it behind. You're the New Jerusalem. The old Jerusalem had all that stuff in it. The New Jerusalem, no. We're going to stay away from these things. And it could be any number of things that he lists. I don't need to go into detail about all those things, but he's basically saying when you start over, this idea comes from Isaiah 52. Also again from that restoration thing. He says, awake, awake Zion, clothe yourself with strength. Put on your garments of splendor, Jerusalem, the holy city. The uncircumcised and defiled will not enter you again. And so Isaiah is prophesying when you reform Israel after the exile, make sure that you don't build it on idolatry and all of that nonsense. Make sure that you're a holy people and start over afresh with a new life. Yeah? It's one of the things I love about baptism is it's kind of a death to the old self and being born again, right? It's like laying your body down in the grave and being resurrected again. And when you come up on the other side, don't come up the same person. You come up on the other side, wash away all the past and start over again. You with me? All right. Verse 9 says, one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls who were loaded with the 7 last plagues came. We explained all of these. There's whole chapters about that. The 7 bowls are the 7 bowls of the judgment, which came from the prayer of those that had been murdered during the tribulation. And so it was the prayers of the saints. So he's talking to a generation now of the early church. All your friends and relatives that were praying, "Oh Lord, save us. Oh Lord, avenge us." The book of Revelation symbolically pictures all of those prayers being put in bowls and poured out. And that's what happened to Jerusalem. And he says, when he was speaking with me, he said, "Come here and I will show you the wife, the Lamb's bride." That language is almost exactly way back where he says, "Come here and I'll show you the prostitute that leads all the inhabitants of the world." Oh, in fact, I have it right here. It says 17, excuse me. He says, "One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and spoke with me, saying, 'Come here, and I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute.'" And so here you have these bookends. It's the great prostitute is unfaithful Israel. This is the old Jerusalem. And now the bride is the new Jerusalem. And that's us, the church. Not necessarily attached to one spot on the planet, but mobile. Could go anywhere on the planet that the Lord is in their hearts. Could go even as far as St. Helens, Oregon. Can you believe that? The end of the world. Isaiah 62 says, "As a young man marries a woman, so your builder will marry you. As a bridegroom rejoices over his bride, so your God rejoice over you." And so it's from Isaiah that this idea of God's restored people, he's talking really specifically again to the restored Jerusalem when they came back into the promised land. And he says, he also likens the Israelites to a woman that married too young and then was abandoned. He goes, "No longer are you going to be childless and unmarried and abandoned, but I'm going to marry you." And so here's this idea. I didn't really like that when I was a kid. People told me that I was the bride of Christ. I don't want to be a bride of anybody. But it's a church. It's a metaphor for the church, right? And so the unfaithful Israel got destroyed. But the brand new thing, which is still going on, we're to be like a faithful bride and pledge ourselves to only one God. You with me? Questions? I really apologize for those of you that are brand new and you just came for baptisms and you're coming into part 21 of a 21-part series. And so there might be a lot of stuff that I'm talking about that's either completely new or without any foundation. You can go back on YouTube if you want to and read some of the earlier ones, but feel free to ask me a question if I'm stripping your gears. Any questions so far? You're all tracking, or you just don't want to raise your hand? Okay. Tell me.
That are apocrypha to the Bible.
Yeah.
Are they in the book of the Ethiopian Bible?
The book of Enoch is in the Ethiopian Bible, yes. The only churches that accept Enoch is in their canon is the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and the Eritrean Orthodox Church. And I think one of the versions of the Egyptian church. So yeah, in their canon, it's in their Bible. It's not in the Protestant Bible, and the book of Tobit, for example, is in the Catholic Bible, but not in ours. And so I've had one of my young adult sons say, "Dad, what about this book of Enoch I keep hearing about on podcasts and stuff like that?" I said, there's no conspiracy theory to hide it. You can look it up on the internet. Has anybody looked up the book of Enoch? Anybody want that homework assignment? It's interesting, isn't it? I agree, it probably doesn't belong in the Bible. There's a lot of fantastical things in there, but I know it. I've read it and obviously looked it up. So it's interesting because it helps decode some of the stuff that John talks about or some of the other verses. And then he carried me away in the Spirit. And every once in a while through this entire book, he says things like this that you might just breeze by. But just in case you forgot, everything in this book happened in a dream. Right? You have been in the middle of the Nutcracker suite. That's why the mouse has a sword and why the clock can dance, because you are in a dream. And so people that are just so literal, oh, I have to take everything literal. If it was meant to be literal, he would have said it literal. And if the author meant it to be symbolic, then if you take it literal, you're misreading it. Does that make sense? So literal isn't more correct, and neither is symbolic. That's why I don't care which one it is. I just want to understand it. So he carried me away in the Spirit. That part I'm going to take literal, that this is all very spiritual. All right? To a great and high mountain, and he showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. And so carried me away to a very high mountain is also how he showed him the great prostitute, which was the original Jerusalem, getting destroyed. And now he's saying the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. So St. Augustine was the father of Western Christianity. He was in North Africa in a place called Hippo. And he started off his life as a futurist. Most of his early writings, he was futuristic. Thought the book of Revelation was predicting the future. And then it became, well, if this is about, because the futurist read the book of Revelation as Babylon the Great was Rome and it was going to fall. And it didn't fall. And then in the 4th century, Constantine the emperor became Christian. And so then they changed the theory to say, well, maybe this book was about Rome becoming Christianized. And then something terrible happened. In 410 AD, the Goths and the Visigoths destroyed Rome. And they said, well, I guess not. Because now it's about if the new kingdom, if the new Jerusalem is Rome and it's the center of the Christian church, it just got destroyed. That doesn't fit any of this. And so Augustine sat down and thought hard about it, and he wrote a new book called The City of God, where he began to explain and understand for the first time, maybe what he's talking about is not building an actual earthly city. Maybe what he's talking about is a spiritual city, and maybe it's you and me. So he says, it is indeed descended from heaven from its commencement, since its citizens during the course of this world grow by the grace of God, which cometh down from above through the laver of regeneration in the Holy Ghost sent down from heaven. The laver is the wash basin in front of the tabernacle. And so he says, so-and-so speaking this, we're the new Jerusalem, we come down out of heaven from God because that's where the grace comes from. And he says, having the glory of God, her light was like the most precious stone, as if it were jasper stone, clear as crystal, having a great and high wall. And so he goes in and begins, now he's going to get very symbolic. And every one of these, he's going to talk about a lot of precious stones and fancy stones and pearls and streets of gold, and people have wrung their hands and created charts and tried to figure out what each one of these stones stands for. I'm convinced it doesn't matter. It's not so much about the stones other than just symbolically. Part of the prophetic voice when they were rebuilding Jerusalem is Jerusalem's just going to be dripping with diamonds. It's going to be gorgeous. It's going to be adorned. It's going to be beautiful and fancy. It's going to be like better than anything you've ever seen in your entire life. So this is just beatifying the church, saying this is what the church should be. Not that we should be fancy. We don't have a fancy building. We have a very big and plain building. But we ought to be the ones that bring beauty into the world. Yeah? And so Tobit, there's Tobit, one of those that didn't make it in. And it isn't in Ethiopia. I don't know if it's in the Ethiopian Bible. Don't know. I'd have to look it up. He says, for Jerusalem, by the way, if you ever get curious, I wonder if that's in there. Just look it up on ChatGPT. It's only wrong half the time, but just look up, I have no insider information, so look up, you're curious about Tobit, go read it. It says, for Jerusalem shall be built up with sapphires and emeralds and precious stones, thy walls and thy towers and battlements with pure gold. And the streets of Jerusalem shall be paved with beryl and carbuncle and stones of Ophir. And I have no idea what those stones are. So, and it doesn't really matter. He goes on to say, and the number 12 now is going to come up a lot. Why is 12 a big deal? Anybody? Excuse me? Yeah, there's 12 tribes of Israel. And when we were back at the time, remember about the 144,000? That's a number. Why 144,000? Because that's 12 times 12 times 1,000. That's like a big round complete number. And so 12 became the number of the complete people of God. Are you with me? Even though what's really weird is in the Old Testament history parts, there's never really a place when the 12 tribes existed that there were exactly 12 tribes. It's a symbolic number. The number became a perfect 12 during times of prophets like Ezekiel after the exile. It became a very symmetrical 4 by 3. And so the priest's ephod or Aaron's breastplate had 12 jewels, and it was 3 by 4. And Ezekiel's New Jerusalem had 4 sides with 3 gates on each side. So it's 4 by 3. It just is one of those numbers. Why is 12 a big deal in the ancient world, even outside of the Bible? Because there's 12 months. And that's been true since the planet existed. And it will always be true. There's 12 months. That's why 7's a big number, because there's about 7 days in a quarter lunar cycle. And you can't change it. So there's always going to be 7s and there's always going to be 12s. But that's why there's eventually, towards the end of the Old Testament, there's 12 tribes. That's why Jesus picked 12 apostles. So 12 is just that number that's always there. And so having 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels whose names were written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. There you go. On the east were 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, on the west 3 gates. Jerusalem was never square per se. It isn't today. It's squarer now than it was back in the time of the writing of the Bible. It's all kind of weird shaped. And when Nehemiah came and rebuilt the gates, there were 10. So the 12 gates idea is a prophetic kind of it's a very symbolic thing for, just like Jerusalem is this perfect square, actually a cube, but that the church is going to be complete. All of God's children are going to be present and accounted for. You with me? Even though by this time most people didn't even know which tribe they came from anymore. The 12 tribes were symbolic. Some of them did. The Bible tells us some of their tribes, but a lot of them were like me, European. I don't know. And I did the little DNA test too, but it's still, I'm a mutt, I'm mixed. Aren't you? Most of us are by this time. All right, so this is a symbolic number. In Ezekiel, so this is during the time of the exile. Ezekiel is in Babylon. He's way before Isaiah, but he's envisioning Jerusalem being rebuilt. And he says, and the gates of the city will be after the names of the tribes of Israel. The gates, 3 gates northward, the gate of Reuben 1, the gate of Judah 1, the gate of Levi 1. And it shall be 18,000 reeds round about. And the name of the city from that day shall be Yahweh Shammah. The Lord is there. And so this is Ezekiel, who never got to see the second Jerusalem get built. He never got to see the second temple. But he's prophesying about it. And he says, you know, when you rebuild it, you should have 4 walls, and on each wall, you should have 3 of the names of the tribes. They never did it, but that was his vision. If it was up to him, that's how they would have built it. Actually, the gates are called like the dung gate and the sheep gate and stuff like that, the east gate. Anyway, Revelation 21 says, and the wall of the city had 12 foundations. There's 12 again. And on them the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. This is one of the places that I think is a little bit of an Easter egg. For me, it could have been the Apostle John, but probably if the Apostle John was writing this, he would not include himself as one of the foundations of the New Jerusalem. You know what I mean? If he was one of the 12 apostles, this sounds like somebody a generation or 2 removed from the apostles, now that the apostles have like patriarch status. Does that make sense? But this is where I get the idea, because we just had the 12 tribes, and now we have the 12 apostles. When it says, and there were 24 elders around the throne, my guess is he's talking about the 12 patriarchs and the 12 apostles. 12 plus 12. Welcome those of you that are coming for baptism. I'm going to be done in just a couple minutes. We're only going to go as far as, I think everybody's scheduled to come in about 7:30. All right, so we're almost done. I don't know if you read what it said on that rock outside when you came in. One of the lines is this: being built on the foundation. He's talking about the church. Being built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus himself being our chief cornerstone. And so Ephesians as well was written late in the New Testament at a time when the apostles and prophets were now, it had already been established. Revelation 20, verse 15. Man, I'm so close. There's only 22 verses. I don't think I can do it. Do you? Yeah, probably. He who spoke with me had a measure, a golden reed to measure the city, its gates and its walls. Both Ezekiel 40 and Zechariah 2, which are both post-exile, talk about measuring the walls. Zechariah says, I lifted my eyes and I saw and beheld a man with a measuring line in his hand. And then I asked, where are you going? He said to me, to measure Jerusalem, to see what its breadth and what is its length. Now I'm ready for it. Can you read this next line together? The city lies Foursquare. Just in case you were questioning, yes, this is where our name comes from. You know that? So all churches are supposed to be Foursquare. I don't know why they aren't. But Foursquare is one word. It means it's four-sided or it's got four corners. Either way works. Foursquare means balanced. Just like your chair is balanced and it doesn't tip in one side. We don't get off radical on this way. We're not the frozen chosen and we're not rolling down the aisles. We're somewhere in between. We think you can be very biblical and be full of the Spirit at the same time. We think you can get excited and still not be weird at the same time. We think you can kind of be in the middle and have friends that vote red and vote blue, and that we can all get along. That's why I don't pick a side from the pulpit. I think we ought to just all be able to get along. You with me? So there you go. It says it right there. The New Jerusalem's supposed to be, and the New Jerusalem is the church. It's supposed to be Foursquare. Okay, anyway. Just in case your friends give you a hard time. What's Foursquare again? What are the four squares? No, there's one word, Foursquare. All right. And its length is as great as its breadth. And he measured the city with the reed, 12,012 stadia. That's 1,500 miles, which is also as far as the blood. These are symbolic numbers. Are you with me? It's not a literal city on the earth. Its length, breadth, and height are equal. So it's like the Borg. And its walls are 142 cubits. That's about 216 feet. It's shaped like a cube. How can you build a city like a cube? Doesn't make sense, right? Because I don't even think we're supposed to draw pictures of this stuff. The book of Revelation is speaking figuratively and symbolically. Are you with me? If the city is a literal city on earth, those dimensions do not make sense. By the way, something else, 1 Kings tells us that the altar, the golden altar where they sacrificed upon, was also a cube. So he says its wall is 144 cubits by the measure of a man, that is, of an angel. Does that last line confuse anybody? Yeah. Good. It's supposed to be weird. We're measuring by a man, and by a man I mean an angel. How can he do that? Because everything you're listening to is happening in a dream. In a dream, you can be riding along in your car and then a second later you're surfing with Aunt Martha. And there's an elephant on the end and it's not tipping the surfboard over because anything can happen in a dream. But this is a dream that is prophetic and it's talking about what we're supposed to be like someday. Welcome, everybody that came in. We're almost done. The construction of its walls was jasper. The city was pure gold, like pure glass. It always confused me that. How could gold look like glass? I think it's like this. I used to think it was one of those kind of mystical, only happens in a dream thing. I think by pure glass or transparent, he's talking about like they didn't have glass back in those days, so it was like a shiny gold that you could see your reflection in. The foundations of the city's walls were adorned with all kinds of precious stones. First foundation was jasper, and then sapphire, and then chalcedony, and then emerald, sardonyx, sardius, chrysolite, beryl, topaz, chrysoprasus, I don't know, jacinth, amethyst. I only know about 5 of those. So people over the years have put these together with the zodiac. Josephus did. He connected the 12 stones in the ephod of the priest. He connected it with the zodiac. And so did Philo of Alexandria. But it just makes sense. Why is there 12 in the zodiac? Because of the same thing. Because there's been 12 months in the year since the planet has existed. And so those 12s are going to weave in and out all over the place. There is, on the banks of the Sea of Galilee, there's an old Jewish synagogue. And when they uncovered the floor, in the center of the floor, there was a mosaic of the zodiac. Is that weird or what? So even probably 4th century, they were still kind of figuring out how much of the mythology you could reuse and use again. And in Exodus 28, he says, you shall set in Aaron's breast. This is just the explanation of the 12 things. And I think I'm going to do one more. Isaiah says, you afflicted, tossed with the tempest, and not comforted. Behold, I will set your stones in beautiful colors and lay your foundations with sapphires. I will make your pinnacles of rubies and your gates of emeralds and all your borders of precious stones. It's not very practical to make a gate out of an emerald unless you're speaking symbolically. What's the meaning of all of this? Is it supposed to be beautiful? He's talking about the church. He says, I know you've lost Jerusalem. I know you lost a lot of your friends and your family. The church had gone through its own Holocaust. But he said, but I haven't forgotten about you, and this isn't the end. It may be the end of old Jerusalem, but New Jerusalem's just getting going. And New Jerusalem's going to be even more beautiful than the old one was. Yeah? And we're mobile. We can go anywhere the Holy Spirit goes. I'm going to wrap it up with that. Is that all right? Questions before I do? You want to come, brother? You're going to lead us in some songs? Yeah. He's going to come, all the people come in and get ready for the baptism. He's going to lead us in a couple of songs. How's that? All right, thank you. Lord bless you. Thank you for coming.